Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Taylor, and I'm one of three pastors who serve at KBF. I'm sure, like most Christians, I'm always watching for the movement of the Holy Spirit. Sometimes the Spirit's lead is very clear. Other times, it takes a lot of prayer and discernment. Early August, I was thinking and praying about what passage the Lord would like me to give a sermon on this morning. In my private devotion, I was reading through 1 Corinthians, and I wrote in my notes that 1 Corinthians chapter 13 would be a great passage to give a sermon on. I actually have this physically written down, dated August 9, 2020, so I know I'm not imagining this. But life is busy, and I did not think about it much more since then. In fact, more recently, I was starting to read Matthew 18 for the passage today. Well, last Sunday, as I was listening to Pastor Ruichi's sermon, he preached on Romans chapter 12, verses 9 to 21, love in action. And right at the beginning of his message, he said, "As you know, another great description of Christ's love is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And I encourage you to read that chapter this week along with what we study today." Well, that was too much of a coincidence for me. So I hope I am following the Spirit's lead here as I continue the love theme from last week with some more insights drawn from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Specifically, I'm going to cover parts of the first 7 verses. Firstly, verses 1 to 3, which have a similar pattern that teaches us that even if you have amazing gifts or make big sacrifices, without love, you are or gain nothing. Secondly, in verses 4 to 7, Paul gives 15 examples of what love is and what love is not. I'm going to focus on verse 7. And in particular, one way of love, which is patience, and the different forms of patience that Paul alludes to in verses 4 to 7. The patience of the weak, the patience of the powerful, and the patience that distances itself from anger. So let's start by reading the first 3 verses of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all of my possessions to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing." The common pattern of these 3 verses is that gifts that seem to be of great value, speaking in tongues, fathoming all mysteries, giving to the poor, without love are nothing. The examples that Paul gives, gifts of prophecy, or can fathom all knowledge, seem to be tailored to the gifts that the Corinthian congregation boasts that they possess in abundance, such as wisdom or knowledge mentioned by Paul in the opening chapters of 1 Corinthians, and ecstatic speech mentioned in chapters 12 to 14. To reinforce his point, Paul's example of nothing mentioned at the end of verse 1 is a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Now, the sound of resonating metal would have been very familiar to the first readers of his letter, the Corinthians. You see, at the beginning of the Christian era, Corinthian bronze was highly prized in the Roman Empire and was even used to embellish the Great Gate of Herod's temple in Jerusalem. The Corinthian marketplaces would have been ringing with the sound of metal workers shaping Corinthian bronze for a variety of uses, like cups, cutlery, cymbals, gongs, and even armor. So the image that may come to mind is, if you are thirsty or hungry, and someone gives you the finest cup or plate made from Corinthian bronze, an alloy of gold, silver, and copper, and fashioned by a master craftsman, think here about the great gifts that Paul has mentioned. But the cup contained no water, and the plate had no food. And think here of the essential ingredient, love. You would remain hungry or thirsty. It would be an empty gesture. In a similar way, if you spoke in the tongues of men or angels, had immense knowledge, or endured great hardship with a boastful heart, not a heart filled with love, it would be worthless. There would be a profound sense of nothingness, emptiness. Though Paul gave specific examples, the formulaic nature of these verses tell us that it can be applied to similar instances in our own lives. That when we share the gifts that God has given us, when we sacrifice time and energy, it should always be a reflection of and motivated by love. Christ's love, and not some personal gain or boast on our part. Unless encompassed by sacrificial love, agape in Greek, religious action is meaningless. Let's move to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 7. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Now here Paul starts off by saying what love is. Love is patient and kind. Then he describes what love is not or does not, which is envy, boast, proud, dishonor others, self-seeking, easily angered, nor keep records of wrong, delight in evil, and then ends with what love is again. It rejoices with the truth, always protects, trusts, hopes, and perseveres. Now that is a long list. Many of the examples, particularly of what love is not, again seem to be specific to what Paul saw in the Corinthian congregation, but we can relate to. I am going to focus on one way of love that is mentioned at the very beginning and end of this list and is alluded to in the middle. That is patience. The whole sequence starts in verse 4 with love is patient. Now the word patient in verse 4 in Greek can be broken into two words that mean far away and anger. This can be understood as the patience of the powerful. It echoes God's long suffering, such as in Psalms 103 verse 8. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. Have you ever been in situations where you find yourself worked up and as a result saying or doing something you regret? Here God asks us to distance ourselves from anger, so his compassion, grace, and love has a chance to shine through. This theme of patience or distancing ourselves from anger also turns up in the middle of verses 4 to 7. At the end of verse 5, Paul writes, "It, love, is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs." Have you ever been wronged? Even now, when you remember a time that you were deeply hurt, are there strong feelings that resurface? One of these feelings may be anger. Angry at what happened to you. Angry that those who wronged you were not sorry or punished. Angry even at God that it seems he let this happen to you. Being told that love keeps no record of wrongs sounds like Paul is telling you to forget it all, sweep it under the carpet, and don't remember it anymore. But that is not easy. Even Paul did not forget the traumatic and negative things that happened to him. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 24 and 25, he writes, "5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten by rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea." So this is not about forgetting easily. It is more about remembering well. Though Paul remembered wrongs and would even recount them at the right occasion, they did not control his actions. And so he was able to love when it would have been understandable for him to have borne grudges or sought revenge. Maybe love in its patient form allows enough time to pass for the memory of being wronged to separate itself from the raw emotion. This could be patient love, directed inward, allowing space and time for past wrongs to heal. Imagine anger as fire, whether it burns internally or externally if someone else is very angry. If you get too close for too long, it may result in you getting burnt. Thus, patience, understood as far away, and anger mean a part of love understands that healing takes time and should be a balance between engaging and allowing for space. This brings us to another mention of patience, which occurs at the end of verse 7. "Always perseveres," which on occasion is translated "patiently endures." The word translated in the NIV as perseveres comprises 2 words in Greek, meaning under and to remain. This can be understood as the patience of the weak, who have to endure a heavy load but are helpless to end their suffering by their own power. An example of this is when Jesus' mother Mary and the other woman stood at the foot of Jesus' cross as he died in agony. They are helpless to rescue him, but choose to remain by his side. This teaches us that when you patiently endure, especially when you are helpless to change your or another's circumstances, it is an expression of God's love. Though I only managed to touch on parts of the verses in 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 to 7, what lessons can we take away and apply to our lives? 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 to 3 teaches us that possessing great gifts or making big sacrifices without love has little worth. Reflecting about this in a church context, early September would normally be a time when we ask members of the KBF family to share their gifts and volunteer to help in one of the church's ministries, or even suggest one of their own. Last year, we had a ministry fair, which was great fun. This year, there is no ministry fair, but KVF still needs you to share your gifts. What 1 Corinthians 13 teaches us is that the primary driver of our desire to serve is not out of obligation or personal gain, but love. To be specific, Christ's sacrificial love that he asks us to live out in this world. Whatever you do, ask the Lord to fill it with love, that your words and actions may not look like fine and fancy Corinthian bronze, but be reflections and outworkings of his love. In verses 4 to 7, I focused on patience as a way of love. The patience of the strong, where you can retaliate, but choose to extend mercy and grace instead. A patience that distances itself from anger, so past wrongs can lose their power, and over time are replaced by forgiveness and love. The patience of the weak to endure what you cannot control, an untimely death or an incurable disease. In a church context, we are hoping to worship together again and return as far as possible to our normal ways and patterns. But this year, everything will take a bit longer as we navigate a coronavirus-affected landscape. As we do, let us walk in the way of patience, so that what shines brightest is God's love. As Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 14, let all that you do be done in love. May God protect you, and may Christ's love inspire you.